First of all, I'd like to introduce my mother, who's my biggest fan, probably. Hold your hand up. There she is. Right. She comes so that you'll all be nice to me, you know. Well, here's some upcoming programs we got. And we got several going all the way up to September, I believe. Next month, April 25th, John Butler, who gave a program here before, will give another one on the flood of 1913. That flood wasn't in Bloomington proper, but on the outskirts. And what it did was it cut off railroad service. The Monon couldn't get through, or the Illinois Central. And so it showed how important the railroad had become to this community at that time. On May 30th, Clay Stuckey will give a presentation on the grist mills of Indiana. And I've told you this before, but he and I tracked down one of them. It was a Billy Carter grist mill, who was one of my ancestors, had built it in 1840. And we went to see the remnants of it, or where it had been. And we have some photos of that, and he's many others he's going to show too. June 27th, Duncan Campbell will give a return program. He gave one on barns last year. This one will be on stone quarries locally and all the mills and whatnot. He has a lot of rare vintage pictures he's going to show along with it. I've seen this one before. On July 25th, Steve Rolfe of the Civil War Roundtable will speak about Captain David Buskirk, who was the tallest Union soldier at around 6'10". And there's quite a history around him and his family. And he'll talk about the preservation of some of the cemeteries around town. August 29th, Dan Combs, another guy who's been here before, but it's been a couple of years ago, will again give his program on the great flu epidemic of 1918, which wiped out a considerable amount of the community back in those days. Something that's fascinating to me, being an old retired pharmacist. September, Bob Hamill. Everybody knows who Bob Hamill is. Used to be the sports editor of the HT. He'll give a program on the pioneering black athletes of Monroe County, like George Shively, Bill Garrett, George Talaferro, and others. I saw this one he gave at the History Center, and people will like that, I believe. So now that brings us to today. Another return presenter, Brad Cook of IU Photo Archives, will give part 2 of the program he gave in January concerning the history of the IU campus in vintage photos. And he left off somewhere around 1900, and so he's going to pick that up today where he left off. So, Brad?
Okay. Thank you. I don't think this fits in. Oh, there it goes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
No.
Did I turn it off? How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. I accidentally turned it off. So yes, thanks, Mike. Again, my name is Brad Cook. I'm the photo curator at the Indiana University Archives, and as he said, I was here in January and gave part 1 of History of Indiana University. We started off with obviously the founding in 1820. We talked a little bit about first President Andrew Wiley, etc. The buildings on the old seminary campus, and then the fire, of course, that destroyed Science Hall, which brought us to the campus we're at today in Dunn's Woods. And I left off just starting to talk about Mitchell Hall, so I'll just start up where I left off. Mitchell Hall, as you see here, was a wooden structure. It was built in 1885. It was only supposed to be a temporary structure. Owen and Wiley Halls were built, they were of brick. This one was just supposed to be a temporary building, but it wasn't torn down until the 1980s. It didn't look anything like this by then. But the original structure, as you see here, was 60 feet by 40 feet, and it was constructed where Lindley Hall sits today. When Lindley Hall was constructed, this building was moved behind Lindley Hall, basically behind Lindley Hall, Chemistry, Rawls Hall, where the new multidisciplinary science building is today. The building was used as a chapel, as a women's gymnasium, as the student building for a while, The music department was in there. The art museum was in this building at one point or another. Oh, sorry. Forgot to grab my clicker here. There it goes. In 1918, the upper story of Mitchell Hall was removed, and an addition, a 40-foot by 16-foot addition, was added to the first floor. Over the years, I don't know how many of you went to Indiana University, but in later years, there were many additions to this building. It was a maze, and it was a big-time fire trap. And I know that ROTC was in the building, and as I mentioned earlier, the music department, but many other departments used all or parts of Mitchell Hall over the decades until it was finally torn down. Mitchell Hall's original name was Maxwell Hall, but it was changed to Mitchell when the current Maxwell Hall, when that building was built, it was called Library Hall, but when they changed it to Maxwell Hall, the original Maxwell Hall became Mitchell Hall. And it kind of a little of a break here in the history of IU. I did want to show you some few photos of Bloomington right about this time when we moved to the campus. These are all taken from the roof of the Wiley House on 2nd Street. This is looking west on 2nd Street towards Walnut Avenue and College Avenue. And let's see if my little dot works here. If you see this building right here, that's the first university building, the one that was built in, I think it was 1855. It's the one whose third floor was eventually torn off and it became the Bloomington High School for many years. So here we are on top of Wiley House looking west on 2nd Street here.
I think that's 1885. Right?
This one was taken, yes.
Derek and I got on top of the roof, and he took more photos.
Oh, did he?
In 2015.
Okay, yeah, this one and the next two were all taken in 1885. Here's the next one. We're looking mostly to the west, but yes, you can see Central School here. Downtown Bloomington is up this way. And then the last one is actually towards Bloomington. You can see the courthouse at the time. And again, these are all taken from the roof of Wiley House. Okay. In the fall of 1885, when the university had moved to the campus at Dunn's Woods, they also brought with them a young new president in the form of David Starr Jordan. Jordan was born in Gainesville, New York on January 19, 1851. He grew up on a farm and at an early age became interested in botany. He graduated from Cornell University with a master's degree in 1872. And during his last year at Cornell, he was an instructor in botany. The following year, he was made a professor of natural history at Lombard University in Illinois. And over the next couple of years, he held positions at two other institutions. In 1875, he received a medical degree from the Indiana Medical College, after which he became a professor of biology at Butler University. In 1879, he was a professor of biology at Indiana University. He is also recorded as being a professor of zoology. Sorry, my phone just... Sorry. After the moss killer scandal that we talked about in my last presentation in January, Jordan was elected president of Indiana University in December 1884, and he began serving on January 1st, 1885. He was almost 34 years old. During his tenure as president, Jordan accomplished great things. He introduced the policy of sending young Hoosier men off to graduate work so that they could then qualify for positions at Indiana University. He introduced the major department system, and little by little, over a period of years, he introduced the elective system. In 1888, he broke with the university tradition of each graduate giving a speech at commencement in favor of one speaker. Well, it makes sense because for many years, students that were graduating, they had to give an oration during commencement time, often in Latin or Greek. And commencement day literally lasted all day. They had a break at lunchtime, but there were, each person had 15, I think it was 15 to 20 minutes to speak So for each, even in the days when you only had 15 to 20 people graduating, and all the other things that happened during commencement, that's a long day. People actually brought picnic lunches with them in the 19th century and made a day of it. But it was a big event in Bloomington. You just didn't have the parents of people that were graduating, family, but you had just citizens of Bloomington that wanted to come and see the event and the speakers. So in January of 1891, work began on the creation of extension courses. On March 3rd, 1891, the legislature granted alumni the right to elect 3 of the 8 members of the Board of Trustees. Later that spring, Jordan was elected the first president of Stanford University. He served in this capacity until 1913, when his title was changed to chancellor. He retired in 1916 as chancellor emeritus and died September 9th, 1931. In his lifetime, however, Jordan was also known as a great scientist. He wrote approximately 200 books on fish. Most of these were published by the U.S. Fish Commission, of which he held the title of scientific assistant. He was a member of the U.S. Census Bureau, where he was put in charge of the investigation of marine industries in the Pacific. For a time, he was the U.S. commander in charge of fur, seal, and salmon investigations. In 1909, he was the international commander of fisheries. In 1984, Indiana, Stanford, and Cornell universities established the David Starr Jordan Prize. The prize is given every 3 years to, and I quote, recognize young scientists who are making research contributions likely to redirect the principal focus of their fields. End quote. The prize covers the areas of Jordan's interest: evolution, ecology, population, or organismal biology. The winner is selected by a committee of representatives from each of the 3 institutions. The winner receives a cash prize and the commemorative medal that you see here. In 1890, Library Hall was built. Again, its name was changed to Maxwell Hall in 1894. The Romanesque style structure was designed by George W. Bunting of Indianapolis. The original structure was 148 feet long and 72 feet wide. The legislature of 1889 made an appropriation of $60,000, making this structure the first to receive a direct appropriation for an entire building. In 1907, Professor Arthur Lee Foley designed and oversaw the construction of a 2-story with basement addition on the north side, which you see here. Originally, this part you see connecting the two was not there. That was added within a year or 2 after this part was built in the back there. The addition was actually more of an annex, and as I said, it was not attached to the original building. The annex did not become an actual addition until 1913, when the 2 structures were connected. The basement and first floor of the connection were used simply as hallways, and the second floor was used as a filing room for the various administrative offices. Because at the time, Maxwell Hall was just not the library, but all the administrative offices, and the president's office was housed there. Until 1907, when Franklin Hall was built, the central portion of Maxwell Hall was used as the library. After 1907, that same area was used as the law library. Also after 1907, the rooms on the first floor of the annex were used as lecture halls, while the second floor was used as the moot courtroom for the School of Law. The second floor at the west end was used as offices for the president, registrar, dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, dean of men, and while other rooms throughout the entire building were as offices for the law school faculty, the alumni, publications department, publicity, bursar, the dean of women, and the faculty club. But this is one of the auto offices of the president's office. Indiana University's 8th president was John Merle Coulter. He was born November 20th, 1851 in China. He received his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees from Hanover College, the last being in 1883. After receiving his bachelor's degree in 1871, he was made professor of natural sciences at Hanover. From 1879 to 1891, he was professor of botany at Wabash College. In 1891, following the departure of Jordan to Stanford, Coulter was elected president and professor of botany at Indiana University. Coulter was a driving force in establishing the YMCA at IU. He also added greatly to the extension work, so much so that 700 students were enrolled by 1892. One of the most difficult tasks Coulter had to contend with was the replacement of faculty that Jordan took with him to Stanford. For decades after that event, and even still, some people even claim today that Indiana University never recovered from that event of Jordan leaving and taking faculty with him to Stanford. The first gymnasium was a wooden structure 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. The building was completed and then dedicated on January 20th, 1892. The building was located just to the northwest of Owen Hall, and its total cost was $1,000. The catalog of 1891 describes it as, and I quote, "a new and spacious building, well adapted to the purpose for which it is intended. It is erected solely for a gymnasium, and in its construction special attention was paid to light, heat, and ventilation and position of apparatus," end quote. In 1905, a 40 by 12-foot addition was constructed on the east end. The purpose of this addition was for the storage of feed and machinery. In 1910, another addition was constructed for use as a stable. Sometime after 1896, when the first assembly hall was constructed, the first gymnasium seen here was converted into a carpenter's shop, and the building was raised in 1932. Joseph Swain became the university's last president for the 19th century. He was born June 16, 1857 in Pendleton, Indiana. He was graduated from Indiana University in 1883 and then received his master's in 1885. In 1893, he received the LLD from Wabash College. While at IU, he served as instructor in mathematics and biology from 1883 to 1885. He was an associate professor of mathematics from 1885 to 1886 and professor from 1886 to 1891. Swain was actually one of the many faculty that followed Jordan to Stanford, to Stanford in 1891. He returned to IU in 1893 to become IU's ninth president. He left IU in 1902 to become the president of Swarthmore College. He died May 19, 1927, and was buried at Friends Cemetery in Pendleton. When his wife died, his body was removed and buried with his wife's at Knightstown, Indiana. During Coulter's presidency, enrollment increased 145% from 524 to 1,285 students. Kirkwood Hall, the first assembly hall, Kirkwood Observatory were built, and construction of Lindley Hall began under his tenure. Francis Swain started to campaign to raise money for a women's building. The monies raised eventually went toward construction of the student building. I think I have more about her later. During the 1893-94 school year, Arda Knox became the first woman to be president of the senior class. Before 1894, the organized, meaning the fraternities, sororities, clubs, etc., held elections for their class officers. The unorganized students would hold elections for their class presidents. During the 1893-94 school year, it was decided that there should be one group of officers that would represent both groups. The unorganized group put Arda Knox's name on a coalition ticket, and she became the first woman to be the senior class president. She became a very popular person who worked hard at bridging the gap between the two groups. After graduation, she became a teacher at Manual High School in Indianapolis. During World War II, she served as chairman-in-chief of the Cookies and Magazines at the Wabash Street Servicemen Station. She knitted canvassing, sweaters, and Navy scarves for the Red Cross. She helped issue ration books, served as block captain for the Office of Civil Defense. Preston Eagleson, seen here, front row, second from left, became the first African American to be a member of an IU intercollegiate athletic team. He played halfback on the 1893, 94, and 1895 football teams. Eagleson received his bachelor's degree in 1896 and a master's in 1906. Both degrees were in philosophy. In fact, he's also the first African American to receive an advanced degree at Indiana University. Both of his degrees were in philosophy. In 1895, he won the primary oratorical contest. His speech was about Abraham Lincoln, and the Indiana Daily Student of the day wrote, and I quote, "This oration was well arranged and finely polished. It showed more care and preparation than any of the other speeches. In delivery, Mr. Eagleson was strong and impressive," end quote. His 1906 master's thesis was entitled Emerson's Wider View of the Education of Man. He died August 11th, 1911. For a little while now, I'd like to jump into something that's kind of fun, and that is the class scrap. Has anyone ever heard of class scrap at IU? Anybody? A couple people? It's somewhat unclear when the first class scrap took place. But the Indiana Daily Student of September 27th, 1909 pointed out that the first freshman-sophomore class scrap started and I quote, "one dark Washington's birthday soon after the founding of the university. At that time, the sophomores were required to study the works of Horace, and so great was their joy at having completed the course that they burned the books on campus." It's true. That was a trivial happening to start scrapping over, but the freshmen objected to the ceremony, and that was where the class scraps in Indiana began, end quote. The sophomore class thus enlarged upon the ritual. They would gather secretly on the campus and avoid all possible detection. They would give Horace the last sacrament, make somber speeches, and then Horace was burned and the ashes buried. The freshmen, however, went to great lengths to prevent the ceremony, and did so whenever they were able to discover the secret date, place, and time for the sophomore ritual. Eventually, by the 1880s through the 19-teens, scrapping was in its prime. Horace, as a catalyst, is only occasionally mentioned. By this time, the freshman class had decided that they had to display their colors via a flag that would be nailed high in a tree, later on a pole. And here you see them hanging one. I thought you could see the flag in this image. I guess not. Let's see here. The flag became the new catalyst, and it was the solemn duty of the sophomore class to tear down the freshman rag, as they called it, and thus a scrap would ensue. There's a good picture of a class scrap. You can even see, I think in this picture, you can see this guy here. He looks kind of bloody. His face looks a little bloody there. The freshman class won if their flag was still hanging. The sophomore class won if the flag was torn down and either laying in pieces at the feet of the freshmen or being paraded around the campus and town. Broadsides were printed and put up to enrage the other classes from time to time. The sophomores, too, began hanging their own flags. Eventually, it varied from year to year as to who would hang the flag. The faculty and administration became involved, usually against such events, but occasionally helped establish rules to keep the scrap as safe as possible. Keep in mind that class scraps were probably taking place in some form at least as early as the 1830s, and many faculty had participated in such scraps when they had been students, and thus hated to see such an old tradition swept away. Some of the rules can be found on agreements between the freshman and sophomore classes. I'm going to read a couple of those to you. This is still one of the broadsides that they would print. But here's one from an agreement between the sophomores and freshmen. This is from about 1910. And it reads, "First, the banner shall be on the southwest side of the customary post, and the banner shall be 6 feet from the ground. Second, the banner shall be in the form of an isosceles triangle with 1 1/2 feet base and 2 feet legs. The base shall be upward. Third, the banner shall be made of 3 layers of canvas without any foreign substance. There shall be 2 rows of stitching around the edges and 1 row from the apex to the base. The edges shall be unturned. Fourth, The banner shall be put up with 3 ordinary 10-penny wire nails and with nothing else. There were times where they would nail it to the tree and then wire it, put wire around it, anything to keep it up there. See, some of these actually make sense. The banner shall be submitted to the chairman of the athletic committee before 9 o'clock on the morning of the scrap for his approval. 5th, the freshmen shall be within a circle with the post as a center and a radius of 25 feet when the scrap begins. And it goes on. And there are several of them here. I brought several of them, but I don't think we need to go into all of them. It's too much. Many class scraps took place in front of Kirkwood Hall, which is where this photograph is being taken from. There, the same tree was used year after year, and for years the marks on the tree from where the flags were nailed or where the battle raged could be seen. In 1906, in an attempt to surprise the freshmen at the tree during the scrap, the sophomores came up with a truly sensational and ingenious plan. The night before the big scrap, a freshman was returning from a visit and saw someone throwing dirt out of the basement of Kirkwood Hall. Most of the basements in the Crescent part were dirt when they were originally built. The freshman approached the building to see what was happening. As he approached nearer, he noticed that he could recognize the diggers as certain members of the sophomore class. The sophomores were in the process of constructing a tunnel from Kirkwood Hall out to the scrap tree. Their plan was to hide several of their class members in the tunnel, and at the beginning of the scrap, they would come up into the midst of the freshmen surrounding the tree and disrupt their ranks enough to let the bulk of the sophomore class rush the tree and capture the flag. The freshman, however, gathered as many freshmen as he could find. They returned to Kirkwood Hall and overwhelmed the sophomores and thwarted their plan. The story goes on to say that the next day the freshmen caught wind of another plan. They proceeded to the roof of Kirkwood Hall and confiscated half of a parachute that was going to be used by some brave member of the sophomores to attack the freshmen from above. I can't imagine jumping from the top of Kirkwood Hall with even a parachute of today, but anyway. As for the reprisal, the freshmen threatened that they would use an electrified flag the next day, and any sophomore attempting to steal their flag would be severely shocked. This plan was not carried out, however. Class scraps just did not take place one day of the school year. Oh no, there were also terror raids that began weeks before the actual scrap. Freshmen and sophomores had to be very careful if they were going to the library or the book nook at night, for it was warned the enemy traveled in packs, and a single member of the opposing force caught at night alone often had his hair cut off and head painted the color of an emerald. A quick dunking in the Jordan River or your class election being disrupted with a large dose of formaldehyde was also something you wanted to avoid. Incidents such as these kept all members of both classes on their toes for weeks. I was going to read to you the entire letter sent to the university by Frank Hare, who was a football star at IU back at the time. But he and the people that kidnapped him, he was the president of, I think, the sophomore class and the freshman class it was, and the sophomores several days before the scrap decided to kidnap him, and they took him almost as far as or beyond Columbus, Indiana. They actually handcuffed him and tied his legs, but in the letter which he endorses, he says the handcuffs were not tight, his legs were not tied tight. They were always nice to him. He was always nice to them. In fact, their original plan had been to take him to Nashville, Indiana, and spend a couple of nights there so that he couldn't be there for the scrap. But because somebody saw them in town, they decided to continue on to Columbus, Indiana. The kidnappers had used up all their money, so he actually gave the kidnappers money so that all three of them could get back to Bloomington. If anybody ever wants to read this letter, I have a copy of it here, and I'll show it to you afterwards. It's too long to go into, but it's a fun story. Kirkwood Hall was named in honor of Professor of Mathematics and Astronomy Daniel Kirkwood. who we see here. The building was designed by Parker and Jekyll of Anderson, Indiana, and was completed in 1894. Let's go back to the building first. I'm sorry? Yeah. It was completed in 1894. In 1921, the original wooden stairways inside the building were replaced with fireproof stairways and landings. Marcellus Neal was the first African American to graduate from Indiana University. He received an A.B. in mathematics in 1895. Neal was born in Lebanon, Tennessee. His family moved to Greenfield, Indiana around 1872. Neal graduated from high school in 1891 with a strong academic record and received a scholarship to attend Indiana University. After graduation, he taught at various public schools until he became head of the science department at Washington High School in Dallas, Texas. He stayed in his position for over 20 years when he left for Chicago to take a civil service position. While in Chicago, he wrote a treatise on science and several political editorials for newspapers. He died on November 6, 1939, after suffering injuries in a hit-and-run accident in Chicago. Assembly Hall was the 7th building to be constructed at the Dunn's Woods campus. Construction on the 160 by 74-foot long structure began in August of 1896 and was completed that October. The entire structure was of wood. The floor had a seating capacity of 1,200. The galleries along the north, south, and west sides could seat another 400 persons. The building was, and I quote, thoroughly equipped with gymnasium apparatus and shower baths. The architect was Philip Jekyll of Anderson. Total cost was $12,000. In 1914, the stage at the East End was enlarged, and the stage was dedicated by Maud Adams on December 7, 1914, when her company presented J.M. Barrie's The Legend of Lenora. The first basketball game, second of the season that year, was played here on February 28, 1901 against Butler University. IU lost 24-20. The first boys Indiana State High School tournament was held in this building on March 10th and 11th, 1911. Crawfordsville beat Lebanon 24-17. And William L'O'Brien was inaugurated as IU's 10th president here on January 21st, 1903. The building was raised in 1938. The school year of 1897-98 saw the first woman to be editor-in-chief of what is now the Indiana Daily Student, and at that time it was just called The Student. Her name was Florence Reed Myrick. She graduated in 1899 with an A.B. degree in English. And she's seen here with members of the Indiana Daily Student staff at that time. In 1898, Indiana University built its first observatory and transit house on Dunn Meadow. So this is Dunn Meadow. Here you see the hill leading up to where the Union is. I think that's the carpenter shop behind Owen Hall, which would be seated right here. So we're looking east from a point about Indiana Avenue, looking east through Dunn Meadow. The May 1899 issue of the Alumnus said, and I quote, "The observatory is a small frame building. It contains a Browning equatorial telescope of 4 inches aperture and 2 small photographic instruments. The transit house is provided with a side reel chronometer and a Bamberg portable transit mounted on a brick pier." End quote. In 1911, because residents on Indiana Avenue were upset about the aesthetics of the structures, and freshman and sophomore classes often painted their class numerals on the dome of the transit house seen here. Because of that, both buildings were moved to where Woodburn Hall is today. Because of their age, lack of modern equipment, and the fact that they were regularly vandalized, both buildings were torn down in 1928. Jordan Field was constructed in 1897. It was located where the parking lot of the Indiana Memorial Union building is today. The first football game played on this field was against Rose Polytechnic. The game ended in a 6-6 tie. The last football game was played here on November 24th, 1923, when IU beat Purdue 3-0. 1923 was to be the last football season on Jordan Field because it was thought the new Memorial Stadium on 10th Street would be constructed by the 1924 season. However, because of problems with the materials they were using, parts of the building were already disintegrating before it was even finished. So Indiana University actually had to take the contractors to court, and parts of the stadium had to be torn down and reconstructed. So we didn't actually get into that stadium until 1925. So for the I'm sorry?
That's looking south.
Yes, I think the person that's taking this picture is probably standing on top of what is today known as Hyper, but the original men's gymnasium. That's the oldest building in the Hyper complex is on the southwest corner of that. The field house is attached to it. So yes, we're looking to the south. Chemistry building is back there. This is the old power plant, basically where the hotel portion of the Union is today. So chemistry, Ballantine Hall would be over here, and the curved road would be over at the far left end. Yes. So because we couldn't get into Memorial Stadium, you can still see it back here. It's still under construction. All of our home football games in 1924 were played here on Indiana Field, which is basically where the art museum is today. We played 3 games there that season, and we won all of them. It's the only home field we're undefeated on. This is an image I actually found in the 1925 Arbutus yearbook. Leaving the IU campus for a little while, I want to talk about the biological field stations that Indiana University had. For several summers before 1895, Professor Carl Eigenmann, as he's depicted here, had been leading biology students on biological field trips within the state of Indiana. On November 10th, 1894, the Board of Trustees allowed Eigenmann to begin using equipment from the zoological department, either at or away from the university, for the purposes of the zoological department's summer school. Thus, in 1895, the university's first biological station was created. This was also the first inland biological station in America. It was located here. This is the boathouse at Turkey Lake, which is now Lake Wawasee. In fact, Eigenmann wrote that Turkey Lake, out of all the other lakes in northern Indiana, was chosen because of the, and I quote, finding of an old boathouse suitable for a laboratory, end quote. The following year, a laboratory building, seen here, was erected next to the boathouse, and the boathouse was again used for its original purpose. So here you see the original boathouse and then the laboratory building. The summer sessions at the station were 9 weeks in length, and college credit was given. Students worked 6 days a week, and the station was open 24 hours a day. A fee of $25 per student was the only income the station had during its first year of operation. The following year, and because of its apparent success, the trustees approved generously. The enrollment for the station grew quickly. During the first summer, there were 19 students. The second summer, there were 32. The third, there were 63. And the fourth, there were 103. In 1899, because of the overcrowded living conditions, the station was moved about 18 miles southwest to Winona Lake, which is today known as Eagle Lake. Eigenmann described the area as, and again I quote, surrounded by a great variety of natural conditions of water, woods, swamps, and meadows, end quote. This was also the home of the Winona Christian Assembly. The biological field station students would later refer to the Christian Assembly as the White City. The Assembly, however, had donated two two-story, 20 by 45-foot buildings for the station's laboratory uses. The most special feature of the buildings was that the ground floor had cement floors. The zoological building contained private laboratories, a lake survey laboratory, an office for the director, a photographic lab, and a darkroom under the stairs. The botanical building contained labs for embryology, bacteriology, elementary zoology, and botany, as well as its own darkroom. A special unexpected feature of this second building was the fact that it had a 1-foot deep cemented pit beneath the stairway that did not vary in temperature more than 1 degree during the entire summer. This pit was used to store specimens. These two buildings and a third that was built in 1932 were all on the lake shore at the mouth of Cherry Creek. A 75-foot deep artesian well behind the laboratories supplied 5,000 gallons of water daily to each floor in each building. The station owned boats, nets, and sounding and temperature apparatus. Microscopes and other instruments were moved to the station when they were needed. The number of students beginning with the move to Winona Lake was restricted to 100, as this was the number that could be accommodated in the laboratories. For extracurricular activities at the station, a baseball team and tennis association were formed. There were barn floor and platform dances, games, singing, hiking, bonfires, and of course swimming, which was only allowed at 4 p.m. There were a few rules and regulations that were imposed by the local law enforcement. Smoking on the grounds and swimming or boating on Sundays was not allowed. The fact that there was only one policeman for the entire area did not help make the rules effective, though. One summer, a small statue of Buddha was placed on display. One night, the statue disappeared, only to be found several weeks later at a point on the opposite side of the lake with one hand protruding up above the surface of the water as if asking for help. The overall atmosphere, however, during the summer session of 1898 was described in the 1899 Arbutus as, and I quote, very scientific. Young gentlemen at table while attempting to carve their beefsteak talk learnedly of atheridium. Pretty young ladies cut up snakes and rabbits in the most bloodthirsty manner to find out whether the interior anatomy of these creatures looked anything like the pictures in the books, end quote. Yes?
These land, they just leased this property, that IU didn't own it?
I think that for a while they did, but I think that IU actually owned the property because I don't talk about it here, but I think many years later, after the last field station was actually used, I think IU sold the property. But if you want to know more about it, I can find out for you. Okay. By the summer of 1920, fees had changed to $15 for each half term, or $25 for the whole term. While many students pitched their own tents and cooked their own meals, some students rented rooms from $2 to $4 per week, and board could be had from as little as $5 per week. Boats could be rented from $5 to $10 for the summer, and the Winona Assembly itself charged $3.50 for the entire summer to any student that wanted to attend their lectures and have bathing privileges. Courses that were taught over the years included general zoology, embryology, lake survey, advanced botany, dynamic biology, insect life, bird life, elementary forestry, garden insects, and neurology. Fernandez Payne, whose tent we see here, was a future member of the IU faculty as well as dean of the graduate school and the College of Arts and Sciences, mentions in his book Memories and Reflections, and I quote, "There is something unique about the method of study where a small group with common interests give full time to one subject. Freedom might seem to offer opportunities or even encourage students to loaf on the job. Instead, the common interest and close association with good students do the reverse," end quote. The founder, again, Carl Eigenmann, was an IU graduate himself. He was born March 9th, 1863 in Germany. His family then moved to Rockport, Indiana when he was 14 years old. 2 years later, after diligently studying English and its elementary disciplines, he entered Indiana University. He received his bachelor's degree in 1886 and then went on to receive his master's in 1887 and PhD in 1889. In 1891, he was hired as professor of zoology. Eigenmann wrote that his principal interest in founding the biological field station was to further original investigation of the biological problems of evolution, variation, and heredity that were of primary interest at that time. Eigenmann was a beloved teacher to his students who not only thought of him as a good modern teacher, not like many of the older stuffy faculty, but also a very humorous person as well. This photo was taken in 1914 for publication in the 1915 Arbutus Yearbook. The caption reads, and I quote, Dean Eigenmann holds a committee meeting. The dean concurs in the opinion of a majority of the committee. The 1899 Arbutus, in a section entitled The Freshman's Picture Book of Professors, shows Eigenmann in caricature with blind fish and having just been eaten by a tiger. Along with the cartoon is a humorous yet affectionate poem. I'll read it to you. Children, this man must not be missed. It is our famous naturalist. The naturalists, they know about what beasts look like when inside out, and it is this one's dearest wish to know the ins and outs of fish. Naturalists also claim to see the kind of things man used to be before he grew to you and me. But what's the good for us to know that we sprang from a piece of protoplasm very long ago? If they would only tell us true what in the future we shall do, we'd think they knew a thing or two.
Didn't believe in evolution at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it would have been after the publication of Darwin's, thank you, mental block. The first building to be completed after the turn of the century was Kirkwood Observatory in 1900. The building seems to have been completed during the first week of December, and the equipment installed just before Christmas. The dome is 26 feet in diameter and 16 feet tall. Apart from the dome's interior space, the building originally contained a transit room, which also contained a Bamberg universal instrument, a Howard sidereal clock, a chronometer, and a chronograph. The building also contained a computing room, an astronomical library, lecture room, dark room, and a reception room. The architect was John L. Nichols of Bloomington and was built by the Henry Taylor Lumber Company of Lafayette. The structure cost $7,517. The Brashear 12-inch glass telescope, the Warner and Swayze mounting, and other fittings cost nearly as much as the building at $6,516. And it's the same telescope in Kirkwood Observatory today as it was when it was constructed.
That's Indiana Avenue there, right?
Yeah, this is Indiana Avenue right here. So Bryan Hall would be just over here. The law school's over here. Dunn's Woods, of course. 4th Street basically ends right over here somewhere. So yes, we're looking east through campus from Indiana Avenue. Dedication ceremonies began at 8 p.m. on May 15th, 1901. Addresses and music were presented at a ceremony in the old Assembly Hall, after which the attendees walked to the building for its inspection. Visitors were also allowed to look through the telescope. Daniel Kirkwood, whom Kirkwood Observatory is named after, was known as the Kepler of America. He was born September 27, 1814 in Maryland. While he did attend the York Academy in Pennsylvania and would later receive honorary degrees, he never graduated from York, nor did he receive a degree from any other institution of higher learning. He was elected principal of a high school and an academy before being elected president of Delaware College. He also taught mathematics and astronomy at Jefferson College. For 2 years, before he came to Indiana University as a professor of mathematics in 1856. With the exception of 2 years, he stayed in that position until 1886. His whole life was spent in the pursuit of theoretical and mathematical astronomy. He never had access to an observatory, with the exception of one night when he was able to look through the telescope at the Lick Observatory. The sky, however, was clouded over, and Kirkwood never again had the opportunity to gaze at the stars. Kirkwood was, by most accounts, one of those stuffy old professors. He was a man of few words who in the classroom gave directions by signs and motions. If he wished the blackboard cleared, he would point to the task and the student assigned to that task. If he wished a problem demonstrated, he pointed to the problem in the book, the student who was to complete it, and the chalkboard where it was to be completed. He was also, though, a member of the faculty that could also take a good joke. One hot day in June, a student brought with him a big dock leaf with which to fan himself in the classroom. Kirkwood wanted the leaf thrown out the window, so he pointed to the leaf and to the open window. The student pretended not to understand, and Kirkwood repeated the gestures to no avail. Kirkwood then walked up to where the student was sitting and repeated the gestures again, at which point the student went to the window and jumped out. In February and March of 1901, Indiana University held its first intercollegiate basketball games. James Howard Horn, seen here, was the first basketball coach. He had been director of the men's gymnasium and football coach since 1898. The first season's games were played against Butler and Purdue twice each, and one game with Wabash. Indiana University finished the season with a 1-4 record, our only win against Wabash. The following year, our record increased to 4-4, and the following year was our first winning season with a record of 8-4. This is the first Indiana University basketball team, the 1900-1901 school year, and again, all the games that year were played in February of 1901. In 1902, Indiana University was situated at the center of the oolitic stone industry on the Chicago, Indianapolis, and Louisville Railway, better known as the Monon. The university had several student organizations, including the YMCA and the YWCA, the Glee and Mandolin Club, the orchestra, the Independent Literary Society, and the band. The Students' Lecture Association was incorporated in 1892. Strut and Fret was composed of men and women students who wanted to foster interest in dramatics. The Indiana Student Publishing Association was composed of students and members of the faculty. Their endeavor was the publication of the Indiana Student, today known as the Indiana Daily Student. The Cooperative Association was the precursor to the IU bookstore. The co-op was incorporated in 1890 and furnished books, stationery, and other supplies at wholesale prices to its members. In 1902, the co-op was run by Samuel B. Harding, future IU professor of history, and Zora Clevenger, future IU athletic director. In 1902, chapel services were held each Tuesday from 10 to 10:50 a.m. This time was, and I quote, set apart for religious services and addresses by clergymen of various denominations from Bloomington and elsewhere. An occasional sacred concert is arranged and conducted by the musical director. So I was talking to you earlier, this is one of the images we have of the station downtown. And I'm just trying to show you a little bit of some facts about Bloomington about this time. And this photograph, I think this is actually about 1910. Science Hall was completed in 1902. Its name was changed to Lindley Hall in 1962. The building is 160 feet long and 74 feet wide. The architect was Lewis H. Gibson of Indianapolis. The total cost of the building was $100,000. Departments to originally inhabit the building were physics, psychology, philosophy, geology, and education. The building contained a dynamo lab, an advanced electrical lab, 2 photographic labs, a chemistry and battery room, a heat laboratory, and rooms for work in sound and light. The main lecture room had automatic blinds and screens. During World War I, the building was used as a military barracks. It was in this building that in 1921, physics professor Rollo Roy Ramsey gave the first demonstration of radio at Indiana University. Rolleroy Ramsey is right there. And we've tried to figure out exactly what they were listening to because there was nothing in the area at the time. Best guesses are a radio program that was coming from Pennsylvania at the time. When William Lowe Bryan became IU's 10th president, tuition was still free to all in the regular and summer sessions. There was a $1 library fee and a $12 contingent fee in the School of Law. For all laboratories, there was a $2 per term fee. The chemistry department, depending on what courses you were enrolled in, had fees ranging from 50 cents to $5. When taking work in physical training, a fee of $1 was assessed for the use of the gymnasium. For other expenses, I quote directly from the 1902 catalog. The expenses of the student will vary, of course, according to his way of living. Most of the students lodge in private houses and board in clubs. Rooms occupied by one person vary as to rent from 50 cents, there are very few rooms at this price, to $3 per week. A room occupied by two will generally cost somewhat more than for one. Two students rooming together pay as a rule from 75 cents to $1.50 each. At the latter rate, fuel and light should usually be included. Board may be had in clubs at $2.25, $2.50, or $3 per week. Board in hotels costs from $3 to $4. Textbooks and stationery cost about $20 a year for a student in the law school. Cost about $20 a year. For a student in the law school, they cost from $30 to $35. End quote. William Julian Bryan, as we all know as William Lowe Bryan, was born on a farm near Bloomington, Indiana on November 11, 1860. He was the son of the Reverend John and Eliza Bryan. William attended the Phillips School outside of Bloomington, and on occasion when he and his family lived there, he attended school in the town of Bloomington. Part of William's schooling came from reading and hearing others read McGuffey readers so often that he knew certain selections by heart. Bryan felt that his attending school in both the country and the town was one of the most valuable and important experiences of his early scholastic career. In 1877, at the age of 17, William became a freshman at Indiana University. He graduated in 1884. 3 of these years were spent teaching. Upon graduation, he was appointed assistant instructor in Greek at a salary of $250. The position provided him the opportunity to do graduate work, but the salary was not enough to live on, so he resigned the position to accept a better paying instructorship in English with the university's preparatory department. The preparatory department, if you don't know, is a lot like a high school, preparing students to move into the college. In 1885, he was appointed assistant professor of philosophy and acting instructor in English. The following year, he was appointed associate professor of philosophy. That same year, he took a leave of absence to study in Berlin. In 1886, President David Starr Jordan recommended that Bryan be made professor of philosophy and instructor in elocution. His title of instructor in elocution was later dropped because of the heavy teaching load in philosophy. Upon being made a full professor, he almost immediately established the university's first psychological laboratory. William Lowe Bryan is there. This is Clark Whistler. He went on to become a study of Indian tribes in the United States, very famous. This image was taken about 1897. On July 13, 1889, he married Charlotte Augusta Lowe. He then adopted her last name as his new middle name, William Lowe Bryan, and was from. In 1891, Bryan was on leave of absence again. This time he was studying at Clark University, where he received his PhD degree in 1892. That same year, he published his important research entitled The Development of Voluntary Motor Ability. 5 years later, he published a study of the physiology and psychology of learning the telegraphic language. These 2 publications won Bryan the esteem of other psychologists, and he was starred with their vote in the very first edition of American Men of Science. In 1903, they elected him the president of the American Psychological Association. In 1887, he and his wife published Plato the Teacher. This book, according to the publisher, 11 years later was still being used by 12,000 teachers in their study groups. When Joseph Swain was elected the 9th president of Indiana University in 1893, William Lowe Bryan was made the 3rd vice president. On June 17, 1902, Joseph Swain resigned to become president of Swarthmore College. William Lowe Bryan was elected Indiana's 10th president on that same day. Bryan began his service as president on August 1, 1902, and he was inaugurated in the old Assembly Hall on January 21, 1903. The only image I have of William Lowe Bryan being inaugurated. I've never seen a photograph. There's nothing that appears in the yearbook, save for a line of people waiting on the old Crescent to go to the inauguration. His inauguration completed 3 days of Foundation Day activities, which included a basketball game versus DePaul, a production of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, and the dedication of Science Hall, which is now known as Lindley Hall. In his inaugural address entitled Faith in Education, Bryan stated, and I quote, "What the people need and demand is that their children shall have a chance, as good a chance as any other children in the world, to make the most of themselves, to rise in any and every occupation, including those occupations which require the most thorough training. What the people want is open paths from every corner of the state through the schools to the highest and best things which men can achieve. To make such paths, to make them open to the poorest and make them lead to the highest, is the mission of democracy," end quote. At the time Bryan became president, he had just completed a study of the occupations taken up by the graduates of the university in the 70 years between 1830 and 1900. He came to the following results, and I quote, "It appeared in the first half of this period most of the graduates of the university became doctors, lawyers, or preachers, almost none of them teachers. While in the second half of the period, more and more of the graduates had become teachers, until the years 1895 to 1900, when more than 60% of them had become teachers. The school was ceasing to be a university and was becoming a normal school for the training of teachers," end quote. Thus, Bryan's and the university's first change in policy was to redesign the institution to provide for greater development of professional and graduate studies, to have a central core of liberal arts studies surrounded by a due number of professional schools. Within 2 years, the graduate school and the School of Medicine were established. Before the President's House, now known as Bryan House, was built in 1924, Bryan was often seen riding his horse to campus from his home on North College Avenue. He would tie the horse up to a hitching post outside of his offices in Maxwell Hall. During Bryan's tenure as president, he oversaw arguably one of the greatest growths in the history of the university. Under his presidency, the schools of medicine, education, business, music, and dentistry, as well as the training school for nurses, the graduate school, and the extension division were all founded. The student building, Franklin Hall, the Rosewell House, Swain East, the Robert W. Long Hospital, the men's gym, which is now part of Hyper, Rawls Hall, a new building for the School of Medicine in Indianapolis, the University Waterworks, Riley Hospital, South Hall, which was the first dormitory for men on campus, now part of the Collins Living Learning Center, Memorial Hall, the first Memorial Stadium, Coleman Hospital, the Chemistry Building, the Union Building, Bryan Hall, and Merrill Hall, which is better known as the School of Music, amongst many others, were all constructed under Bryan. When Bryan became president, there were 50.82 acres of land owned by IU. By the time he left, that number had increased to 136.89 acres. Enrollment during Bryan's administration increased more than 510%, from 790 in the fall of 1903 to 4,821 in the fall of 1936. Bryan was Indiana University's longest-serving president. He was 1 month shy of serving 35 years. His final day as president was June 30th, 1937. He died November 21st, 1955. For 92 of his 95 years, his life's work was conducted less than 5 miles from his birthplace here in Bloomington. Does anybody know what building this might be under construction? No, not the old library. No, it's on campus. This is the student building under construction. Photograph is being taken from the roof of Maxwell Hall, and we're looking toward, so this is Indiana Avenue, looking towards town. I think, let's see here. I don't think the resolution is high enough, nor, I think in the picture you can see the,
First Christian Church.
can you? I think if the resolution were better, we'd be able to see the top of the courthouse as well. The student building was completed in 1906. Until the construction of the Indiana Memorial Union Building in 1932, the student building was the first union building, besides Mitchell Hall, which had been used in part as a union building, although it was never officially given that status. The cornerstone was laid as part of the commencement program in 1905. It was dedicated on June 19, 1906. John D. Rockefeller gave $50,000 for its construction on the condition that others give the same amount. The architects were Vonnegut and Bone of Indianapolis, and the total cost was $102,325.75. The west end of the main structure was for women's students. This area had plunge and shower baths and a 40 by 18 foot, 5 to 7 foot deep swimming pool. It also contained parlors, restrooms, and the women's gymnasium. So the women's gymnasium, if you can, let's go back to this part. You can't see it in this picture, but you know that if you're standing on this side of the student building, there's a large, it almost looks like somebody attached another building to it at that end. And it has curved windows like this, which you can see in this picture here. That whole structure on that part of the student building was the women's gymnasium. Today, it resembles nothing like this at all. It's not a gym at all. In fact, if you go in, I think they've made the whole gymnasium into 2 or 3 floors. I think it's 2 floors. And if you go up to the top floor and you're standing next to these windows, the top curve of this window sits about this high off the floor of the top floor now. The gymnasium had a floor 83 feet long and 49 feet wide. The second and third floors contained the headquarters of the YWCA. The east wing of the building was for the men. It contained parlors and lounging rooms with pool tables and club rooms, including the offices of the YMCA. Rules in the billiards room included only members of the union allowed, no swearing, gambling strictly prohibited, and charge for pool to be 2.5 cents per cue. The center of the building contained a 500-seat auditorium, cafeteria, dining room, kitchen, and cold storage room. The original chimes in the bell tower consisted of 11 bells purchased from the McShane Bell Foundry of Baltimore, Maryland, and cost $3,650. The clock cost $1,490 and was purchased from the Seth Thomas Clock Company. In 1938, a larger pool and pool house was added to the back of the building. It became the Map and Geography Library, and today it's, I've only been in there once, it's computers and it's just a, I think they have large screens on the wall for teaching, etc. The building suffered a major fire during its renovation on December 17, 1990. The building was obviously reconstructed, as we all know today. One of the clock faces that you see here, we actually have in the archives. After the fire, we recovered one of these. You can see that it's actually bolted together in 4 sections. We have all 4 sections, and you can see in parts of this picture some of the glass still stuck in there. And actually, I forgot to pull it out. I'll pass it around for everybody to look at. This is an actual piece of glass from the clock of the student building after the fire. We have several pieces in the archives, And when I was moving this clock face recently, there were still pieces in it, and they were falling out. And we have tons of them. I took one for myself. I tell you what, each section, well, let's see here. Each section, it's very heavy. It's extremely heavy. I have to take both hands, and even when I'm moving it, I have to kind of shuffle along. But if it's all put together, I would say it probably stands about that tall, somewhere in that area. Anybody ever wants to come to the archives and take a look at the pieces of the clock face, we'll show it to you. Our idea is to eventually have it restored, put back together, have some new glass put behind it, and then just have a light behind it, hang it on our wall in our reading room or in the front lobby or in our conference room.
I heard as that was burning,
Mm-hmm.
the floor gave way, the bells came crashing down through the building.
Yeah, I've heard the same story that either the floors gave away, but my guess is the bells probably broke through. The bells are actually still around. They're in storage on campus. They're huge, even the smallest ones. There is one that the IU Foundation took. If you go to their parking lot, the sidewalk leading up to their front door, there's one on a little pedestal. It probably stands about, I don't know, about that high off the ground with the bell. The rest of them are in storage. The University Archives is going to acquire one of the smaller ones because the big ones are just, I'm telling you, they stand about this tall, and they must have a girth of a good 4 or 5 feet at the bottom, and you can't move them yourself. In fact, even the pallets that they're on now, when they were moved to this storage area, are collapsing because they're so heavy. I mean, if I go up there and I grab the top and try and even just do anything with it, it doesn't budge. They're massive.
So what rings now? Is it electronic?
I'm sorry?
What rings now? Is it
Oh, there are bells in there. There are new bells.
bells?
Yeah, there are new bells. When they reconstructed, that was one of the big things that people wanted with the university. In fact, Terry Claypax, who was vice president of administration at the time, who's in charge of having buildings built, et cetera, at that time, everybody was very adamant that it be restored to exactly what it was before. And there are new bells in there. I have photographs of the new bells being put in. Now, whether my guess is that it's that, like the clock before it, the bells were played automatically by some instrument. And there used to be a caroller that would go up and play the bells on Fridays. When I first came to IU, when I first moved to Bloomington in 1991, on Friday nights as I was leaving Bryan Hall, which is where the archives was at that time, there was always somebody up there playing the bells, different songs, 3 or 4 or 5 songs on a Friday night, and they don't do that anymore. I wish they would.
When did they fill in a pool in the women's side?
I'm not sure about that. I'm sure I have that written down somewhere. What I'm reading to you right now, in fact, is I'm putting together a new pictorial history of Indiana University, and something I've been working on for a number of years, but I've actually signed a contract with the IU Press, and I have to have that to them by late summer, early fall of this year, because they want it to be out before the 200th anniversary of the founding of IU. So I have more extensive notes on the buildings, et cetera, and this is just an edited version of what I've been working on. So I'm not sure when the women's pool was filled. Now, which women's pool do you mean? The one in the basement of the gym, or the second one that became the map and geography?
Inside when the
The
original.
the first, yeah, I don't know when the, yeah. Oh, did you in that pool? So what year was that?
58, 9.
So it was still the one underneath the gymnasium.
12 years old.
Okay. Yeah, see, and if I had to take a wild guess, I would have thought before that, but I just don't know off the top of my head. Yes?
In the 70s, the audio-visual center was moved from the barracks on 10th Street to above the pool area.
Oh, it was. And then later they were moved into Franklin Hall. Did you work there?
Yep,
You did. Your name?
Diana Young.
Diana Young. So who was working there when you worked there?
Oh, gee.
Was Ralph Veal still there, or
I worked
Jerry
in-
Mitchell?
I worked in the film distribution.
Oh, okay, sure, okay.
I just had a peon job.
Okay, yeah, that was a little, there were several units within audiovisual, and that was definitely one of them.
Carl Pickens was there,
Mm-hmm,
and he was on 10th Street,
mm-hmm,
and that's the main name I remember right now.
okay. Oh, yeah. I didn't know that they had moved into the student building. Okay.
So there were
And-
two pools?
Yes, there were, at any given time, well, not any given time, but yes, there were two distinct pools in the student building. The one below the gymnasium we saw, which was a women's pool, and then later in 40, I think it was, did I say 41, when they built the pool house on the back of the student building, which later became the Map and Geography Library. That building is still there. Nothing at all that would suggest there was ever a pool in there today.
They probably closed it when they built the men's pool or the hyper pool.
Yeah, the men moved to, the men's gymnasium became their gymnasium in 1917, and the men's pool was there. Women started using that pool not too long after, though, because I know I've seen pictures of women in that pool as well. But yeah, I'm not sure for how long, a decade or so, there was a men's pool and there was a women's pool. Any other questions about student building, or?
What caused the fire?
Well, at the time, the student building was being renovated, and they think what happened was that there were cans of varnish, et cetera, and that somehow that caught on fire. I don't think to this day we really know how it happened.
See ya.
Any other questions? As far as we know.
Who's not seen the glass yet? Everybody seen the glass?
I haven't.
No. No,
I think I'm gonna put it in my
Okay.
pocket.
Well, I'll let you all keep looking at the glass, and I'll continue on. A new library was completed in 1907. The building was renamed the Student Services Building in 1972 and became Franklin Hall in 1988. Its architecture has been said to be English Gothic and Collegiate Gothic. We're not sure which statement is true. And was designed by the offices of Patton and Miller of Chicago. The original structure was in the shape of an L, as you can see here. The main reading room, which is this part of the building, was 95 by 60 feet and could seat 204 readers. The walls encircling the reading room could hold 6,000 volumes. The capacity of the 6 stacks levels was 250,000 volumes. The total cost of the original structure was $108,462.05. An addition was designed by Robert Frost Daggett of Indianapolis and was built in 1926. The addition at the back of the building, that ugly thing you see facing Dunn's Woods, really doesn't deserve its own image. That construction on that started in 1955. So you can see the original structure here. It was in the shape of an L, and then at this side they added on this addition to the building. Corresponding with the opening of the new library in 1907 came the opening of the Book Nook at 114 South Indiana. At first it seems that only books, stationery, pens, and pencils were sold. There was no soda fountain or restaurant at this time. In 1914, Charles Jewett, a future mayor of the city of Indianapolis, tore down the wood frame building that we see here and built a white brick gabled building in its place, the one we all know today. This building was completed in 1916. In 1919, George Grandpa Pulitzer purchased, renovated, and reopened the Book Nook. It was at this time that the Book Nook was first opened to co-eds. In 1920, Grandpa Pulitzer died of influenza, and Angelica Mom Pulitzer and her children tried to carry on the business. But by 1923, decided to sell the Book Nook business to their cousins, the Costases, who had been operating a fruit stand in Chicago. While selling the business entity itself, the Pulitsins retained ownership of the building and rented it to the Costases. By 1924, the Bent Eagles, a relatively rowdy group of students, became the unofficial rulers of what was known as the Nook. Members of the Bent Eagles included Howard Wad Allen, Ed Wolf, William Monkhouse, who was also known as Wolfgang Beethoven Bunkhouse, and Hoagie Carmichael, who was known as Hogwash McCorkle. In 1927, the Costases brothers were found guilty of permitting drinking on the site and operating a nuisance. The jury recommended a $500 fine and a 30-day suspended sentence for Peter. Also in 1927, the Costas brothers held the first annual Book Nook commencement. The commencement was first held because William Monkhouse, again member of the Bent Eagles, a top student in the School of Music, refused to take a required course in hygiene at the university. It was this single class that kept him from graduating. The Costas brothers thus held a commencement in his honor. The commencements were held in 1927, 28, 29, and 1931. The year 1930 was skipped because the Costases felt there was no one that had completed their courses in the curriculum of student life. Commencements included parades that began at the Sigma Alpha Epsilon House on Jordan Avenue, just north of 3rd Street. The parade included participants wearing wild costumes, animals, a band that provided, and I quote, noise, speeches and telegrams from famous persons like Lindbergh and the Kaiser. The telegrams were their regrets at not being able to attend the function. We actually have film footage of one of the Book Nook commencements with sound, and they're actually, in that one, they're actually reading the telegram from Lindbergh, and he had just been married, and he says, "I'm unable to attend as I have other duties to attend to." So he had just been married. He's on his honeymoon.
President Wells there.
Yeah, right here you see Herman Wells. That's Pete Costas, and let me see here. I think no, he's not in this picture. Each commencement came complete. But yes, this is right down on Indiana Avenue, and it is said that more people attended the first Book Nook commencement than attended the university's own actual commencement. But they held a parade. It came all the way down 3rd Street. The film footage we have is just wonderful. The parade coming down, the men singing at the SAE house, the university's alma mater, then the whole parade coming down 3rd Street where they're walking ducks, and you have a guy in a Tarzan costume, and he's being carried on a litter, and just total wild stuff going on in the parade. And then they all came down, and speeches are given. You can see the dead fish on the podium here, and telegrams are read, and diplomas were actually given out. Each Book Nook commencement had a king and a queen, known as Rex and Regina. Each commencement came complete with programs, degrees, and a king and queen. People like Hoagie Carmichael, Chuck Bennett, Wad Allen, Franz Montgomery, who was actually a friend of my grandfather's, Archie Warner, and yes, Herman B. Wells received degrees. Here is a copy of Herman's degree, Doctor of Nookology, Faculty Supervisor Emeritus of the Book Nook. Schools from which you graduated were the Graduate School, the College of Hearts and Appliances, the Tavern of Sessions, the Institute of Chicago Tactics, and the Gym of Physical Emulation. Degrees offered had titles like Doctor of Nookology and the Doctor of Discord, granted to Hoagie Carmichael. Discord, I'm sorry, should emphasize that. It is reported that more people attend, as I said, the Book Nook commencement than the university-owned commencement. The fact that the crowd forced the closure of Indiana Avenue is a good evidence that this may be true. In 1927, Hoagie Carmichael, on a return trip to Indiana University, wrote Stardust on a converted player piano that was situated next to the southwest window of the Book Nook. Now, this is the story as most people know it. This is probably in part true, But we also know that he also wrote part of Stardust at his cousin's home in Indianapolis. I've actually been to the house where and then he probably wrote it in various places. He may have come to the book nook that night to maybe finish it up and use the piano. In 1932, Mom Pulitzer and her sons Chris, Charlie, Pete, and Nick opened the Gables restaurant at the site of the Costases. The Costases had moved the book nook just down the corner to Indiana and Fifth Street, where they built their own building, which later became Block's Women's College Shop. It was a clothing store. And then when I first moved to Bloomington, it was a video game place called the Spaceport, that's right. So again, I tried to emphasize earlier that when the Pulitzers were not able to run the book nook because the four brothers were too young, they sold the book nook business to their cousins, but they held on to the building. When the brothers became old enough, they wanted to run their own restaurant, and the mother there at what is today Buffalo's. So the cousins, the Costases, they built their own building just down the street at the corner, reopened the book nook. So for many years you had the book nook running and the Gables. Hoagie Carmichael also visited here on another of his return trips to Indiana. The Costases closed the book nook at this location in 1953. Block's college shop moved into the building after that. In 1968, the Pulitzers sold the Gables, seen here, to outside interests, and it continued to be operated until 1979. In 1980, Garcia's Pizza remodeled the interior, added lofts for additional seating, and Garcia's closed in 1995. In 1996, the Wildman family reopened the restaurant called the Gables. It closed shortly thereafter in 2000. Roly-Poly Sandwich Shop went in 2002, and in 2005, Buffalo's opened. In 1908, I think I'll go about 15 more minutes. That's an hour and a half, and then I'll quit again, and then maybe sometime later this year I'll do part 3. So if I get to 2 o'clock, just give me a yell, say we've had it, and I'll stop. In 1908, the School of Education was established, and the Rose Well House was constructed. The Well House is not named after Herman B. Wells. We get this question all the time at the archives. It's not named after Herman B. Wells or former Dean of Women Agnes Wells. It is named in honor of Theodore F. Rose. Its technical name is the Theodore F. Rose Well House. And it's not even a well. It's actually there was actually a cistern under there that collected rainwater. Theodore F. Rose, who had graduated from IU in 1875, he was also a member, vice president, and president of the Board of Trustees from 1903 to 1919. The structure was designed by Professor Arthur Lee Foley. The cost was $2,600. And I'm sure you all know the story of how women become co-eds at Indiana University by being kissed in the well house during the 12 strokes of midnight from the student building. Okay. In 1909, the Indiana Union for Men was organized by John M. Wittenberger, and women were made eligible for membership in the union in 1954. Water problems constantly plagued the town and the university, so in 1909, the Board of Trustees decided to create the university's own waterworks system. On March 18, 1910, a committee recommended a site about 3 miles northeast of Bloomington. And then between 1910 and 1914, the university purchased 20 acres. This 20 acres consisted of every foot of land that drained into the valley where the University Lake would soon be constructed. The University Lake is out on the golf course, for those of you that don't know, it's still there. The first work on the dam began in 1910. The dam was to be 30 feet high, 19 feet wide, and at the bottom, 19 feet wide at the bottom and 2 feet wide at the top. The contractor gave up the contract at 22 feet high. The university had spent $15,285 up to that point, but then completed the contract itself. And actually added 6 feet to the bottom width and 4 feet to the height. In 1913, the dam was risen another 12 feet and widened another 14 feet at the base. This addition cost $6,000. The top of the dam is 260 feet long, and I can say that I've walked across it myself. The dam and the lake are still out there and just past the golf course, as I mentioned. The university no longer uses it for a water supply, but when I visited the lake, it looks, they are trying to use the lake and its surrounding areas as somewhat of a biological field station for the biology department. They still use it for that today. The dam and the lake are out on the university's golf course. Yeah. Well, even if you're out there on the golf course, you probably won't see it. It's surrounded by woods, and it's kind of off on one side of the golf course. Most of the golf course is to the west of and to the northwest and north of the lake. There's actually a little road. If you pull into the foundation's parking lot, on the east side of the building, there is a little dirt gravel road that goes out onto the golf course. You can't drive out there on it. I've done it before. You can take that road. It leads all the way back to the caretaker's house, which is above the dam. You can see it here in this picture, okay? And then you can park there and then walk over to the dam. But they don't let people drive out there. You have to have a reason to be out there. Okay. In 1911, the powerhouse and the water plant were constructed at a cost of $2,800. The equipment in the powerhouse cost another $2,200. The building was 50 feet long and 25 feet wide. This building is still down there. It's at the foot of the dam. It's not in any kind of use anymore. You can walk into it, actually, if it hasn't fallen down by this time. The last time I was there was probably, oh geez, at least 15 years ago. It was sort of falling apart then. In 1910, Biology Hall was built. It is now known as Swain Hall East. The building was 125 feet long and 63 feet wide. R.P. Daggett and Company of Indianapolis was the architect. Michael Kerr of Bloomington constructed the attached greenhouse that same year. The building and greenhouse cost $80,000. The departments of biology, zoology, and English inhabited the building. It was from this building that Dr. Alfred Kinsey completed his work into the study of, does anybody know? Boy, you got it, gull wasps. It was also from this building that his first surveys into the sexual histories of individuals began. In 1912, the Extension Division was established. It was renamed Continuing Education in 1965 and the School of Continuing Studies in 1975. In 1890, Professor of History James Albert Woodburn attended a meeting in Philadelphia and returned to Indiana convinced that such a program could be implemented. During the ensuing school year of 1890-91, he offered lectures to alumni and others in Indianapolis, Chicago, and Louisville. This is an image of William Lowe and Charlotte Bryan in 1915 or early 1916, on the day that the cherry trees were chopped down on campus to make room for the men's gym, which again is that oldest building in the Hyper Complex. Students, faculty, alumni turned out to help chop down the trees and to break the ground. This is a piece of rope from one of the plows that were used. There was a long rope, and we have pictures of all the students and faculty holding onto the rope, acting as mules to start breaking the ground with the plow. And there are several pieces of that rope in the archives. In fact, they gave it away on little cards as souvenirs.
Didn't the Dunns live there? When their family lived there?
Well, the Dunns and the Rogers. I don't remember if it's the Dunns that had a house on very near this location or the Rogers. Was it the Dunns? Okay. Because I know that most of the land that IU sits on, except for the athletic plant, was owned by the Rogers and the Dunns. And of course, the athletic, most of that was, if not all of it, was the Ferris family. In 1917, the men's gym was completed. The original plans called for a main building 253 feet long and 94 feet wide, along with an attached field house that was to be 240 feet long and 157 feet wide. The field house was to have a 90 by 30 foot stage at the east end. The lowest bid for both structures was submitted by A.E. Kemmer of Lafayette. Because even this bid was too high, it was ordered that just the main building be constructed. And again, it was finished in 1917. The field house wasn't begun until 1927, and it finished in 1928. The final cost of this part of the building, the men's gym, was $208,473.30. With the exception of the trophy room, the entire building was used by the physical education and the military departments. The trophy room was located on the second floor at the north end and was used for social purposes, including dances. The main gymnasium was located on the second floor, a 114-foot long, 52-foot wide room. On the first floor housed the 88 by 30-foot wide pool. Both the gym upstairs and the pool are still there today. In 1928, the field house was completed. It was dedicated on December 13th, 1928. Here's a poster from the dedication game, Pennsylvania versus Indiana. And here's an aerial of the building before they added on the School of Hyper on the north side. You can see the IU cut in the vines there. It's almost 2 o'clock. I think that's probably a good stopping point. And I'll start up with Jim Thorpe the next time. And if any of you don't know, he was an assistant football coach here for one season. So I'll start there the next time.